Story 1. I remember the moment everything stopped. 1 second, the cruise ship was alive with music and laughter. People were dancing, glasses clinked at the bar, children splashed in the pool, and the night smelled of food and salt air. Then, without warning, all the lights went out. The music cut off mid-song. The fans stopped spinning, and heat from the crowd pressed in. For a moment, everyone went silent. Then nervous laughter spread around. Some clapped, thinking it was a joke or special effect, but it was not. The lights did not come back, except for a few weak bulbs flickering along the hallways. The air turned heavy and still. At first, I stood on the deck rail and looked down at the ocean. Without the ship's big spotlights, the water looked almost alive, black, endless, and too quiet. I remember thinking how strange it felt, as though the ocean was waiting for something. In the next hour, the problems grew. The elevators stopped between floors. We heard people trapped inside, banging and screaming for help. The sound was terrible, like fists against a coffin. Crew members ran about, their faces worried though they tried to stay calm. They told us not to panic, but it was hard to believe them. The kitchens began to spoil too. Without power, the meat and dairy turned bad, and the smell of rot started spreading through the halls. Bars were dark, drinks left half-finished. The captain spoke on the loudspeaker at first, his voice steady, promising things would be fixed soon. But after 2 days, the announcement stopped. Only static remained. That's when the banging began. At first, it was soft, a dull thud against the side of the ship, then silence. Some people said it was just waves hitting, but no wave knocks in a rhythm. Thud, pause, thud, thud. Like something was out there, testing us. At night, it was worse. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard scraping sounds on the metal hull beneath my cabin. Then sudden violent bangs that rattled walls and shook picture frames apart. My roommate swore she saw bubbles rising from the bathroom drain, as if the ocean was pushing up into our room. By the 3rd day, food was limited. We got dry bread, crackers, and bottles of water. Families grew restless. Fights broke out in the hallways. People argued, shoved, even hit one another over supplies. The cheerful cruise environment was gone. We were nothing more than frightened, hungry people trapped above an endless sea. And all the while, the banging grew louder. You could feel it under your feet now, as though the thing outside wasn't just brushing the ship, but pushing against it. The hull made groaning sounds like bending metal. I saw a crew member whisper to another that if the cracks spread, we'd all be underwater in minutes. On the 5th night, I went with a few others to the dark deck. We wanted to see what was really out there. The sea stretched black, silent, and endless. My skin prickled as we leaned over the rails. For a while there was nothing. Then, suddenly, the entire ship shuddered. A huge blow struck from below, knocking us onto the ground. People screamed as furniture slid and glasses shattered. The water beside us frothed violently, as though something massive had surfaced. For just a moment I saw it. Something pale and huge sliding under the water, longer than the ship itself. It disappeared into the deep again, but I knew then. Something was following us, watching us. After that, the banging became constant. Doors rattled on their hinges, windows shook, walls vibrated as though 1,000 fists were drumming from underneath. We were not alone on that ocean. We were being circled by something we could not see fully, and it was patient. By the 7th day, passengers started to vanish. At first, only one person, then a child, then whole families. Sometimes we found smears of blood along corridor walls, stopping in empty space, as if bodies had been dragged through steel. An old man said he saw a dark hand reach through his cabin floor before he ran out screaming. The crew couldn't explain anything. They looked as helpless as us. No help came, no ships passed, no signals went out. We were drifting farther into nowhere. Now I sit here in my cabin, writing this in the weak light of my phone. The emergency bulbs overhead flicker like dying fireflies. The banging is close again, too close. I can feel something moving along the wall beside me, dragging long claws or nails on the metal. Sometimes, in the silence, I think I hear it breathing. I don't think we will last much longer. The ship groans louder every day, like brittle bones about to break. Once the steel cracks, the ocean will claim us in minutes, but I fear it's not the water that will take us first. Something is waiting out there, following us, testing us. And I think tonight, it will finally come inside. Story 2. I used to love the sound of the ocean. It felt calming, like a lullaby that stretched endlessly across the horizon. But now, every time I hear waves crash, my chest tightens, because I know what they can become. It happened on the 4th night of my cruise. I was on the upper deck, holding a glass of soda and watching the dark horizon, when the air changed. The wind had been soft and warm, but suddenly it felt sharp, cold, and heavy, as though the sky itself was warning us. The water turned restless, rolling harder against the sides of the ship. The musicians stopped playing when the first flash of lightning split the clouds. Then the storm came. It wasn't just rain, it was a wall of water and fury. The sky roared with thunder that shook the deck beneath my shoes. I've seen storms before, but this was alive, hungry. Waves rose higher than buildings, slamming against the ship so hard that the floors trembled. People screamed and scattered as chairs and tables slid across the wet deck. The crew shouted for us to go inside, but when I reached the hallway, another wave struck. The ship tilted steeply, throwing me against the wall with dozens of others. My shoulder cracked against the steel, and pain shot down my arm. Children screamed. People slid across the floor as water poured in through broken doors and shattered windows. By the time I pulled myself up, the hall was flooded ankle-deep. I heard glass shatter further down, then shrieks as seawater burst through another window. The carpet floated, curling up like a drowned rug. Ceiling tiles fell, some crashing onto people's backs. I remember one woman clutching her screaming baby, both soaked, eyes wide with terror. A crew member tried to lead her upstairs, but another wave struck, knocking them off their feet. The baby slipped from her arms into the swirling hallway water. The woman's scream cut me like a knife, and then another wave hit, dragging her under. I don't know if she ever got her child back. The storm had no mercy. The captain's voice blared from the speakers. "All passengers move to the upper decks. Do not attempt the lifeboats." His order was clear. I glanced out of a broken porthole and understood why. The lifeboats were slamming violently against the ship's side, ropes straining as if they'd snap at any second. No one could survive if they tried to lower them into that black, boiling water. I stumbled with hundreds of others toward the higher decks. The stairwell was chaos, people screaming, pushing, climbing over one another, desperate just to go up. Old men were shoved aside, suitcases abandoned on the floor. I gripped the rail, dragging myself step by step, my soaked clothes sticking to my skin. Every window I passed showed nightmare waves smashing violently, foam spraying against the glass like fists. I'll never forget one moment. Halfway up, there was a deafening crack, followed by screams from below. Water rushed up through the lower level like a monster breaking free of its cage. I saw people swept away instantly, their cries drowned by the rising flood. Some hit walls with sickening thuds before being dragged down. The lights flickered as the ship groaned, metal bending under the pressure. By the time I reached the upper deck, it was pure madness. Rain hammered us so hard it felt like stones. The wind howled, tearing clothes and hair across faces. Families clung desperately to rails, some huddled together, others crying prayers into the sky. Lightning illuminated their pale faces every few seconds, showing fear clearer than words could. A man near me tried to climb into a lifeboat despite the warnings. A wave rose and crashed onto the deck, flipping the lifeboat like a child's toy. The man vanished with it. His wife screamed until her voice was swallowed by thunder. The ship itself howled with us. The sound of the steel was horrifying, a deep, bending groan that made my stomach twist. It was the sound of a giant thing breaking slowly apart. Every time a wave hit, the ship tilted, and we clung harder to the rails, praying not to be thrown overboard. Hours passed. It felt like days. Some passengers collapsed where they stood, too tired and soaked to go on. The storm didn't ease. It only circled us like a predator, waves striking from every side. My arms ached from holding the rail so tightly. My lips were blue, my skin shivering uncontrollably. At some point I stopped knowing if we'd survive or not. I only remember staring into the storm, into the black wall of water endlessly rising against us, and feeling something break inside me. The sea didn't care who we were. Rich or poor, young or old, together or alone, it didn't matter. The ocean just wanted to take. The last thing I recall before blacking out was the sound. Not thunder, not rain, not even the waves. It was the ship itself. It creaked so loudly that many of us screamed with it, certain it would split beneath our feet. The deck tilted hard, and I went sliding across, my fingernails tearing against the wet metal as I tried to hold on. Then a wave swallowed me whole. I must have passed out, because when I woke again, the storm was gone. The sea was calm, too calm. The ship was broken, windows gone, decks ruined, people missing. The survivors sat in silence, staring at the gentler waves as if they were ghosts watching the aftermath of their own deaths. I am one of them. I breathe, I walk, I write. But every time I close my eyes, I don't see calm water. I see the storm that felt alive, the storm that wanted us. And I know with a sick feeling in my chest that it will come back. Story 3. It started with a cough. Just a cough. At first, nobody noticed. Why would they? On a cruise with over 2,000 people, someone was always sneezing or coughing after too much late-night drinking. But by the second day, it wasn't just one person. It was dozens, and the coughs weren't ordinary anymore. They were sharp, horrible sounds that made the air feel heavy, like something invisible was crawling between us. On the third day, things got worse. People started collapsing in the dining hall. I watched a father drop at the breakfast table, his coffee spilling across his chest as he fell face first onto the floor. His wife screamed, and when she tried to lift him, she started seizing too, her body shaking violently as her chair toppled over. Soon, 3, then 4 others nearby began to writhe on the ground. That's when I knew we were trapped in something far darker than food poisoning. Doctors rushed in, masks tight across their faces, shouting for everyone to return to their rooms. We obeyed, but panic spread quicker than the sickness. People ran up stairwells, dragging children by the arms. I saw a woman faint in the corridor, her nose bleeding, her eyes wide and glassy. Crew members wrapped her in a rough blanket and carried her away. We never saw her again. By evening, they locked us inside our cabins. I remember the sound of it, the metallic click as the door sealed, like the sound of a cell in a prison. That's when fear truly sank in. Passengers banged against the doors, screaming that they needed medicine, that their children were sick, that they wanted answers. But the crew didn't come back, not then. The next morning, food arrived, if you could call it that, a single tray shoved through the gap in the door, bread, an apple, and a bottle of water. No explanation, no comfort, just cold silence in the hall. The captain's voice came over the PA system a few times that day. He sounded calm at first, telling us everything was under control, that medical staff were treating the sick. But later, his voice cracked. You could hear it, fear twisting his words. He spoke faster, shorter, until one night he just didn't speak at all. Silence spread thicker than the disease. Inside my room, the days blurred together. At night, I could hear screams from the cabin next door. A woman begged for help until her voice grew ragged. then silence. The next day, when food came, my neighbor's door stayed shut. No tray pushed inside. It was as if the room was empty now. On the 5th day, I pressed my ear to the thin wall and listened. I swear I heard scratching from inside her room, but the sound was wrong, uneven, weak, as though nails dragged slowly down metal before collapsing. I never heard her again. The worst part wasn't the hunger or the fear. It was the waiting. Waiting for fever to begin in me, waiting to discover if I was one of the next bodies they'd carry away. Every cough of my own made sweat run down my back. Every ache in my head felt like a warning. Eventually, people stopped waiting. From down the hallway came the heavy crash of doors forced open, a rebellion of the desperate. Soon, footsteps ran past my door and voices shouted, wild with panic and rage. I opened my cabin and followed them, because being locked inside felt worse than the risk of dying. That's when we saw it. The staff areas, once forbidden to passengers, were now thrown open, and they stank of death. The smell hit me like a hammer, choking and sour. Hallways stretched ahead, lit in a dim, buzzing yellow, and both sides were lined with black body bags. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Some zipped shut, some not completely. Through a gap I saw a pale hand, fingers twisted in a final spasm. We passed cabins where crew in hazmat suits slumped lifeless against the wall, their masks tilted unnaturally. Whatever they had tried to stop had consumed them too. "Where's the captain?" someone shouted. But no one answered. The bridge was empty when we reached it, controls humming quietly, navigation screen glowing faintly. But no one there. The windows showed only endless water, and for the first time, I realized we weren't moving anymore. The ship was drifting like a corpse across the sea. Some people cried, some prayed. Others tore open more body bags, searching for loved ones they already knew were gone. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the silent controls of a ship with no captain and corridors of the dead. Now the food has stopped completely. The crew is gone. Those of us left alive whisper in the dark and wait for whatever comes next. Some say we'll starve before rescue arrives. Others say the sickness is still moving among us, silent, waiting for its turn with those who remain. As for me, I keep thinking about those bags, lined up so neatly, zipped so carefully, all stored in the lower decks. And sometimes I wonder, what if not all of them are truly dead? Story 4. There are some moments that never leave you. For me, it's the sound of metal scraping in the middle of the night. It was past midnight when it happened. I couldn't sleep, so I stood on the open deck, staring at the dark sea. Everything was quiet, the kind of silence that feels endless. Then the ship suddenly shuddered. A long, horrible sound of metal grinding against metal echoed through the night. The deck shook under my shoes. For a few seconds, nobody knew what was happening. Then someone shouted, "Another ship!" Searchlights swept over the water. That's when we saw it. Beside us floated an old liner, huge but broken-looking. Its metal was rusted and scarred, paint peeling off in long strips. Seaweed and algae clung to its sides. It looked like it had been floating abandoned for decades. But it wasn't dead. Its windows glowed with weak yellow lights that flickered on and off, as if the ship was struggling to breathe. The strangest thing of all was the silence. No voices, no crew, no laughter, no sound of life at all, just that quiet ship, glowing sickly in the water. Our captain stayed calm on the loudspeaker, telling us a small boarding party would investigate. Passengers crowded around the railings as a lifeboat was lowered, and a group of officers crossed the black waves with their flashlights. We could see their lights moving as they climbed the ruined deck of the old vessel. Then, nothing. The lights vanished. We waited. 1 hour turned to 2. Still no sign of them. Some passengers returned to their rooms uneasy. Others whispered in fear. That's when things started happening. The first was a woman in the casino hallway. She screamed and claimed she'd seen someone standing by the stairwell. She said it looked like a drowned man, dripping wet, his face pale and lifeless, but his lips were moving, whispering words she couldn't understand. Security searched everywhere. They found nothing, but the reports kept coming. People saw shadowy figures near their cabins. Some swore they heard footsteps in the corridors behind them, but when they turned, the hall was empty. Children said they woke to cold, wet hands brushing their faces in the dark. I didn't believe it until I saw one myself. It was late, and I sat in the lounge with a glass, trying to calm my nerves. That's when I noticed water, a small trail of seawater glistening on the carpet. My chest tightened. Slowly, I followed the wet footprints. They led to the glass doors of the deck. He stood there, not outside, not inside, just there. A tall man, his clothes torn, hair plastered to his skull, water dripping onto the floor. His skin was pale as milk, his eyes cloudy white. His lips moved, whispering, but I couldn't understand the words. The sound wasn't even human. I froze, unable to breathe. Then I blinked. He was gone. Only the wet trail remained. That night, no one slept. There were whispers behind cabin doors all through the night. Whispers in strange voices. Whispers that seemed to push their way into your skull. Families screamed and prayed in the halls. At one point, I heard an entire family wail as their cabin flooded with water. By the time I reached them, the door hung open, water dripping, the room empty. The captain's voice grew worse each day. He admitted the boarding crew never came back. He told us all to stay inside, but even he sounded terrified. Eventually, his announcement stopped altogether. At dawn, the old ship was gone. No sound of it leaving, no shape on the horizon, just gone. And yet the things from it, the shadows, the dripping people, they stayed with us. We saw them clearly now. Women in old dresses, their lips blue, their skin gray. Children holding hands, eyes like fog, staring without blinking. Sailors in uniforms ripped to pieces, seawater streaming from their boots. They wandered our ship silently, whispering strange words, water pooling wherever they stood. The crew tried to fight it, grouping themselves, locking doors, hiding. But seawater leaked in anyway. One by one, they disappeared. Passengers stopped resisting. Some simply walked into the halls and didn't come back. Some knelt down and began whispering back to the drenched ghosts, as if they finally understood the language. And me? I stayed locked in my room. But I can hear them. The wet footsteps outside, the drip, drip, drip pooling under my door, the whispers pressing into my head like waves. I don't understand their words yet, but they're getting clearer, closer, like a voice in my own mouth, like they're teaching me. The silence outside is too calm now, like the sea is waiting. I can already see a line of water creeping across the floor, and I don't think I'm afraid anymore. Because the more they whisper, the more I feel less human. The more I feel like I belong to them. Like I was always meant to join them. Story 5. I used to think the scariest thing about the ocean was how endless it looked. I was wrong. The scariest thing about the ocean is the sound it makes when it wants to swallow you. It began during a night so clear it felt unreal. The sky was sharp with stars, the sea calm, black as glass. Everyone on board was relaxed. We were sailing through icy waters, surrounded by glittering chunks of ice that looked almost magical under the moonlight. People sipped wine on the deck, couples leaned close against the railings, children pointed at the glow of the horizon. And then the ship groaned. It was not the usual hum of engines. It was a deep, grinding sound, like bones snapping under weight. The whole ship shuddered, glasses rattled. Then, under the waterline, the steel screamed. We'd hit something unseen. A rock formation, they later said. Alarms pierced the night, shrill and merciless. Red lights flashed along the walls. Crew members rushed through the decks, shouting, "Stay calm! Please, stay calm!" But behind them, Water surged up from the lower levels. At first, it was just a dark slick on the floor. Then rivers. Then waves crashing through corridors. People screamed as it swept their feet, dragging luggage and sometimes children away. The freezing water was sharper than knives when it touched skin. I ran with the crowd toward the stairwell. The panic was worse than the water. Dozens jammed together, slipping, clawing, shoving, screaming. An old man fell, and though he shouted for help, people stepped over him in their rush to climb higher. I saw his hand vanish beneath the black surge of water, his voice cut short. On the lower deck, a group of passengers were trapped, banging desperately on the stairwell gate as the water rose. Crew members struggled to unlock the barrier, but before they could, an alarm shrieked, a warning for the watertight doors. Those massive steel slabs began to close automatically, groaning as they sealed the lower areas from the rest of the ship. I can still hear the screams. The passengers knew what those doors meant. They would be sealed down there, sacrificed to stop the flood from reaching the rest of us. Men, women, children. They clawed and shrieked at the metal, their faces twisted with terror as freezing water climbed their chests, their throats. Then, the doors slammed shut. The screams didn't stop right away. From the upper deck stairwell, we could still hear them through the walls, muffled, echoing cries as the hallways filled. Pounding fists and shrill voices, fading into bubbling gargles. Then silence. That silence was worse than the screams. The ship tilted violently. I stumbled, sliding against the wall as another wave of icy water blasted up a corridor, knocking 3 people off their feet. One woman's head struck the corner of a railing with a crack before the water swept her limp body away. The crew shouted orders, but most of them were drowned by the chaos, the alarms, the water, the panic. A mother screamed for her son, pushing through the mass of bodies, but the boy was nowhere to be seen. I don't know if he was lost to the rising decks or to the crowd pressing so tightly you could hardly breathe. We finally reached the upper decks, where air still felt safe. But even there, nobody truly believed we were safe. The ship groaned endlessly, a wounded animal in the dark. Every tilt sent waves of panic like fire through the passengers. We smelled the sea everywhere now. Salt, rust, and something colder, sharper, fear. From above, we could look down into the sealed areas through grated panels, though crew members tried to push us back. I wish I hadn't looked, because I saw faces. Pressed against the porthole windows of the flooded hallways were people still alive, just barely, their hands reaching toward us through the glass. Their mouths opened and shut in bubbles, their eyes wide and pleading. Some slammed their fists weakly against the thick window, the sound muted. My stomach twisted as I realized they were watching us live while they drowned behind walls of steel. The sight burned into me. Their terror, their desperation, and the awful truth that there was nothing we could do. Hours passed, if you can call them hours. Time lost all meaning. People huddled together on the cold upper decks, soaked and shivering. Some prayed, some stared blankly, some whispered names of the drowned. The engines still groaned, but there was no promise of rescue yet. Only the sound of the waves slapping against our wounded ship. But what haunts me most isn't the water itself. It's those muffled screams. Even now, long after that night, when I close my eyes, I hear them, not clear but warped, like voices underwater. Sometimes in my dreams, I stand again in that stairwell, listening to the pounding fists on steel, the begging voices, cut off as the sea filled their lungs. I wonder if their echoes stayed trapped in the ship's walls, soaked into the steel itself. Maybe that's why even when the sea is calm, even when everything around me is silent, I can still hear them, crying, pleading, drowning forever in those dark, sealed-off halls. Story 6. I've never felt fear the way I did on that cruise, and it didn't start with screaming or danger. It started with silence. The morning was bright, the ocean perfectly calm. I walked to the dining area, expecting the usual noise: crew bustling, waiters carrying trays, the captain's announcements echoing over the speakers. Instead, I walked into a ghost town. Half-eaten meals rested on tables. Coffee cups sat steaming, as if they'd just been set down. A pan in the kitchen still sizzled faintly, but no one was there stirring it. No cooks, no crew, no captain. At first, people laughed. They thought it was some kind of prank, maybe a performance to liven things up for the passengers. But laughter quickly died when no one came back. We searched. Groups of us went through cabin after cabin. The crew quarters were worse. Uniforms tossed on bunks, shoes left behind, half-written logs on desks. It was as if the entire crew had just walked out in the middle of living. Still, the ship moved forward on its own, autopilot carrying us across the ocean. That should have been reassuring, but instead it made my skin crawl, like some machine was guiding us while the living people who were supposed to steer it had been wiped away. By afternoon, panic had settled in. Someone tried the radio system in the control room. Nothing. No static, no noise at all. Phones had no service either. Even emergency frequencies felt dead. The sea stretched endlessly around us, gleaming under the sun, but we could have been drifting on another planet for how silent the world became. Night changed everything. I had taken part in another search party that day. We didn't find the crew, but in the captain's quarters we found something stranger. Dozens of slips of paper scattered on his desk. All of them had one line scrawled across them, jagged and urgent. "Do not stay on board after midnight." That phrase has never left me. My stomach twisted as I read it. The others laughed nervously, saying it must be a joke or the captain was drunk when he wrote it. But deep down, we all felt it. The paper wasn't a prank, it was a warning, and that night, the warning came alive. Around midnight, I was lying in my cabin, heart pounding too hard to sleep, when I heard it. Boots. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing through the hall outside. Slow, measured steps. I thought, for a fleeting, hopeful moment, that maybe the crew was back. Maybe the nightmare was ending. But when I opened my door carefully and looked out, the corridor was empty. The lights flickered faintly above. The sound of the boots continued, moving away, turning corners. But no one was there. Others heard it too. I wasn't alone. I saw doors crack open along the hall, wide eyes peering out, whispers shaking in the air. We listened together as the invisible boots patrolled the corridors, circling like guards watching over us. Sometimes they stopped right outside a door. Sometimes I could swear I felt the vibrations under my feet, as though whatever wore them was standing inches away. We tried to follow the sound, some of us desperate for answers, but every time we turned a corner, the hallway would be empty, the boots just out of reach. The deeper we went, the more wrong the ship felt. Lights flickered violently. The air turned cold enough that our breath fogged, and still the steps just kept going, circling and circling. By the second night, people were breaking. One man locked himself in his cabin, swearing he'd rather starve than walk those halls again. A woman fell to her knees sobbing as the boots followed her down 3 corridors, never visible, always close. Some passengers swore they saw shadows out of the corner of their eyes, thick, soldier-shaped, marching in pairs, and every morning the ship was still moving forward on autopilot, as if dragged by some unseen force. No rescue came, no planes passed, just ocean and silence. On the third night, a group of us went back to the crew quarters. In the dim light, we noticed something we hadn't before. Long scratches along the walls, as though fingernails or something sharper had raked them. Under more of the captain's notes, scrawled in different handwritings, we read words that froze my blood. "Don't open your door after midnight. The watchers will know you're awake. They are not men anymore." That night, I bolted me door shut. I shoved everything I could find against it: chairs, luggage, even the mattress. Around midnight, the boots came again. They stopped outside my room. The sound was so close, so heavy, that my lamp shook on the nightstand. Then there was silence. I held my breath. Slowly, my door handle turned. Once, twice. It creaked as if pushed, just enough to rattle. And then it stopped. Something exhaled on the other side. Not a breath like a human's, but a sound like the wind moving through a hollow space. I don't know what will happen when midnight comes again. I don't know what they want, or if the crew too had heard the boots before they vanished. But I do know one thing for certain: the ship is not ours anymore. And every night, when the footsteps return, I realize the handwritten warnings weren't meant for the crew at all. They were meant for us. For more stories like this, share and subscribe, Goofy Horror.